President Obama starts his second term after winning a substantial victory. But the election did not change many of the basic fights here in Washington. Earlier, I sat down with Peter Baker to talk to him about what the next 4 years may bring and how much this inauguration differs from President Obama's first.
Well, what's interesting is the last inauguration, of course, was this period of great crisis for the country. Actually a very grim moment when the economy was on the precipice and the auto industry seemed, heading into the abyss and still in the middle of two wars. And yet, it was a moment of hope and optimism, at least among the people who supported President Obama. There was this notion of historic change, first African-American president, 1.8 million people on the Mall to see this moment. This time around, no second-term inauguration is ever as exciting as the first. We'll have a half to a third of that many people this time, and the people who are going to be taking office are the people who are already in office. So they're a little jaded and a little seasoned and a little battle-weary.
We've been very focused on how the highs are lower. But the lows are also higher, as you're saying. I mean,
Right.
We're not in the middle of a terrible economic crisis at
Exactly.
this point.
Yeah, they're inheriting a better situation. The economy's not great, but there is prospect of a better a year ahead. Obviously, they're focused on the fiscal issues, which are pretty daunting, a big national debt that still needs to be tackled, but not an acute sense of crisis that we felt, I think, 4 years ago.
Rahm Emanuel famously said, you never want to let a crisis go to waste.
Right.
And by that, he meant that when there are very bad times going on in the country, you actually have a chance to fix some of the underlying problems.
Right.
Does that suggest that we're not going to see as ambitious and sweeping a second term in terms of legislation coming from the White House?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a second-term president often tries to swing for the fences in different ways because he's thinking about legacy. A first-term president wants one thing, a second term. But with a Republican House, unless he can change that in the midterms of 2 years from now, will constrain him, and the fiscal situation will constrain him. There's a limit to how much he can do. So I think he'd like to try something big and sweeping. I think he sees immigration as that possibility, and possibly tax reform. Reagan did that in his second term. But the range of options are more limited this time around.
Now, you and I were talking a little bit about this week the history of how bad second terms are. I mean, Reagan had Iran-Contra, Clinton had impeachment, Nixon resigned.
Right. Who wants a second term?
Who wants a second term? I mean,
They all
George W.
do.
Bush didn't have any kind of major scandal like Watergate, but he had a really bad second term.
He had Katrina. He had Harriet Meyer's Supreme Court nomination go down, and obviously Iraq was terrible. And then the very end, of course, is the financial crisis.
Do you think they've sat around and talked about the second term curse? And do you think they're doing anything to try to avoid it?
I think they've talked about exactly that, and I think that their hope is that they can plan their way out of it, that they can have an agenda that will control the second term a little bit more, but they recognize that a president only has so much power in this. Even before he took office as president, some of his aides remember then Senator Barack Obama observing that a president really only controls about 15–20% of what he does, and that everything else tends to be reactive. And that's the inevitable forecast I think you have to make for the next 4 years.
And finally, the inauguration itself, we actually have two.
Yeah.
It's a little strange.
He's the first president since FDR who will take the oath of office 4 times, right? 4 years ago, he had to do a second time, a do-over, because the Chief Justice and he didn't quite get the right words right. This time around, he's going to take it on a Sunday. But when we do it on a Sunday, we then do it again on a Monday. So it's an interesting moment where he'll do it semi-privately on Sunday. There'll be cameras there and so forth, but no big parade. We're going to hold the big festivities on Monday.
So he and the Chief Justice this time, they have two built in, so if they mess up the first,
That's
they can
exactly
do
right. I hope there's some practicing going on, but I think they want to get this right this time.